a lot of this premise came from the conversation that we had last week where we talked about Anthony Richardson and Giannis and how the
Yep.
comparison between him and Giannis in terms of, hey, this is more like an NBA draft for the Colts in terms of where you're looking at traits, you're looking at potential more than the production and what they did in college. This is, we want to take the best athlete with the best natural talent, and we can teach them the skills to play at a higher level. This is what they do in the NBA all the time. When you look in the playoffs, you look at the guys behind the bench. Everybody has all these skill development coaches. You have a shooting coach, you have a ball handling coach, you have a coach that works on the footwork when it comes to your post players, etc. Well, the National Football League, we never really thought about operating like that. But now when you look at NFL staffs, they have more coaches than they've ever had. You always have a position coach, then an assistant to the position coach. Sometimes you have an assistant to the position coach, and then you have a specialist. So, like, you may have a pass rush specialist to develop a pass rusher. So, in thinking about what the Colts have done the last couple of years, they've drafted these great athletes. Like, I mean, just guys that are at the top of the charts based on the next gen stat stuff, like their potential score, their athleticism score, and all that. And then you think about the coaches that they have on their staff. So you think about Gus Bradley. You've seen and been around Gus with the Chargers. He is one of the best teachers when it comes to it. The system is very simple. So now you spend all your time refining the footwork and the fundamentals of how to play the game. That's the whole beauty of being simple. Now you spend more of your time on fundamentals. Then you think about what Shane Steichen has done. You saw what he did with Justin Herbert. We saw what he did with Jalen Hurts. I would say that it appears that the system is kind of simple for the quarterback, but it allows them to grow and develop. Well, just imagine if you take all these great athletes and you put them in a developmental system that teaches them learn skills where they can get better. How good could that team be if everyone in the organization is on board? And so now, in thinking about what the Colts are doing, you begin to look at Anthony Richardson as kind of like the ultimate experiment to this theory. How great can you take someone who in college, look, the numbers aren't great, but when you look at the athleticism, off the charts. I mean, off the charts in terms of superhero type athleticism that he brings to the table. Well, if you put him with a great quarterback coach who can put a system that plays to his strengths, how good can he be? And so now I'm curious and I'm fascinated by how this might work. Because years ago, when we looked in the NBA, Giannis, Kawhi Leonard coming out of San Diego State was a great traits. Russell Westbrook coming out UCLA was all traits. Even think about a guy like Devin Booker, all traits, didn't play much, but now you look at him with the Suns, he is absolutely killing it. So I am fascinated by if the Colts are able to pull this off, does this completely change the way that we talk about scouting going forward? Not that it hasn't been done before, but to go all in like they've done, I think they could be on to something that I won't say revolutionize the scouting community, but certainly send some ripples through the scouting community that you need to pay attention to what is going on in Indianapolis.
Yeah, I mean, and you went through the list of guys. I mean, all the way down to the end. I'm pulling up their depth chart right here. Like Jake Witt, their 7th round pick, was a workout warrior. So if you just look at the workout numbers of Blake Freeland and Jake Witt, that's their 4th round pick and their 7th round pick. Those might be the two most athletic in terms of testing offensive tackles in the entire draft. So it wasn't even just Anthony Richardson with their first pick all the way through. Adibare, was an all-time workout at the combine, the D lineman. Juju Brents, we talked about his jumps, and you mentioned it in the piece, ridiculous. Daniel Scott had an unbelievable combine. Darius Rush ran in the 4.3s, so adding those secondary pieces. And then I started looking back through the rest of their roster. Even like you look at some of the guys that they have, DeForest Buckner is a physical freak, like how big he is, how long he is. Deo Odiengbo, who they got, who was coming off of an injury coming out of college, he is one of the, I think he's like 36-inch arms. So just athletic, length, traits. Kwity Paye tested out, out the gym. They brought over Ebukam. I'd have to pull up his workout numbers, but I think he was blazing fast. Shaq Leonard, coming out in terms of the length as an off the ball linebacker was unusually long. It goes all the way through kind of their whole group. It's not just, this draft. This was the explosion of it. This was just the sheer numbers from start to finish, but they've built an entire roster there. Now, the other side of it is I always go back and we talk about how the evolution of things and how this is the way
Mhm.
the NBA is doing it. The two things I would say that would be maybe let's be a little bit patient to see how it all works out. The 2 points I would make. Number one is the limited time that you get with these guys compared to what you did years ago. So you got to be
Years
really
ago, yeah.
efficient with your time on the grass. You got to be really efficient because you just don't have simply as much time in the off season or in season for those guys to develop. So you got to have excellent teachers who know how to not only teach but set the schedule so that they're maximizing their time on the grass.
Mhm.
That'd be the first thing. The second thing is, and we've talked about this for years, I always go back to the training that I had in Baltimore where we talked about the STI and we said, okay, speed, toughness, instincts. If you look,
Mhm.
it's been a long track record. If you get a fast team that's also tough, that also is very instinctive, those are the best teams. So they've added all these traits. They've added all this size, speed, length, athleticism. The T and the I are the two things that I'm curious about, Buck, is do those guys also possess the toughness that you need? And are they also instinctive enough to be successful? That would be my counter argument to this whole thing.
And look, and I think that's a great argument because the one thing that you can't necessarily teach instincts. You can teach somebody what they should be looking for. It's another thing for them to see it and trigger like they're supposed to. And so the instincts, that's something that I don't know if you can give someone who's a great athlete those instincts. We've talked about it. We've talked about looking at linebackers who are always a step late, but
Mhm.
sometimes their athleticism can make up for it. And so, yes, maybe that can cut the margin down if they're not as instinctive. But the toughness is a big part of it. Now, how Shane Steichen, how the Colts score about building a tough team. Are they in pads more? Are they more physical than some teams when it comes to it? Like as much as people talk about Andy Reid and they love the X's and O's, if you ask anyone who has been around him, he runs one of the more physical training camps that you can find. You saw it when you worked with him
Yeah.
in Philadelphia. In training camp, they slobber knock. They get after it, And so that physicality, that stuff is something that you have to have. But to me, at a time where we're seeing it's harder now more than ever to evaluate guys because the college systems are so different than some of the game in the pros, you have to be able to try and figure out what is my lane going to be. Are we going to be more collegiate in terms of how we play, or are we going to be a developmental program that can take these players who may not have been given all the skills that we would want in college and find a way to build them up so they can play at a higher level. Um, to me, it's something where it has always been talked about. When I was in Green Bay and I worked for guys that worked under Ron Wolf in Seattle, John Snyder's and Scott McLuhan's and even Scott Fitter's of the world. Everyone has always been on prototypes. But to me, this is kind of like an even different prototypical thing because the Seattle Seahawks have done it. They had their developmental plan. When Dan Quinn went to Atlanta, he had a thing called Plan D, which is plan development, where what they did is 10 minutes after practice every day, they would take all those young guys and spend 10 minutes on the grass working on fundamentals. And every day would be something different. But if you kind of extrapolate those minutes over time, so you have 4 practices a week, so that's 40 extra minutes. You add that, multiply that times 16, 17 weeks in the season, all of that extra time, those reps may allow you to play at a higher level when it's time for those guys to play. Yeah, but I think it has to be a concerted effort from everyone. And to me, what I'm hearing from the Colts is Chris Ballard is at the top. The owner understands it because you've heard him talk about Anthony Richardson and how he needs to play right away. Well, if that is the case, and if everyone is in agreement, now we're not looking at results. We're focused on the process with a desire to get the results down the line. Well, if everybody's in agreement, this kind of unlocks a lot of different things when it comes to playing and those things. Because DJ, we always talked about, well, we didn't want to play the young guy because you're worried, how can I win games with a young guy playing through mistakes? But if
Yeah.
everyone is like, oh no, we're putting all the young guys out there, not just Anthony Richardson, we're putting them out there and we're going to live through the rough moments because we'll be better when we get to the other side. Well, now that's a completely different approach than what we're used to seeing.
And I think you made a great point too when you said the simplification of the scheme. So we can spend if you look at our time like a pie chart on the field, most NFL teams, there's going to be what do you think? 15% of the time spent on fundamentals and
Oh yeah.
85% of the time on game plan, scheme, assignment, alignment, all
Hmm.
that stuff. I think when you can simplify things, maybe if you could take that 15%, maybe get it to 30%, maybe 40%, where you are drilling fundamentals. We're teaching these guys how to play football, and then not having to devote quite as much time to teaching them how to learn and think and react to what we're trying to put on their plate from a scheme standpoint.
It is. And so here's the funny thing about that. If you go back and you study the great NFL coaches in our past, right? Like talking about the greatest of all time. When you look at the Don Shula's of the world, the Vince Lombardis of the world, the Chuck Knowles of the world, all of them say the same thing. It's about your fundamentals. It's about that
Mhm.
part more so than anything. It's fundamentals, it's your conditioning, it's simplified scheme, and it's repetition over and over and over. Whenever Chuck Noll and those guys lost, they would come back the next week and do less, not more.
Mm.
And so, if the great coaches of the world that have told you, look, this is how you win a ton of games in this league, tell you that it's about the fundamentals and simplification, maybe this is almost like a turn back the clock moment where you're saying, hey, we're going to be simple, we're going to be detailed, we're not going to fool people, we're going to work on execution and developing our players better than you do. So, over time, we'll just play the game better than you.
Yep. I think it's really fascinating. And look on the other side of the ball, the offensive side of the ball. We talked about that defense. Jonathan Taylor, obviously, one of the premier backs, was a 4-3 guy coming out. Alec Pierce and Michael Pittman, you referenced that in the piece. Those are power forwards. Like, if you're going with the get off the bus team, I mean, when you take Buckner and Odiangbo and you take these big receivers and the tight end, Jelani Woods, like these guys get off the bus. I don't know that there's, what do you think? They've got to be top 5 in terms of the league of just the
Yeah.
most physically impressive teams as they get off the bus.
And so you're now putting it on the coaches. And so I said this, and you know it. Like one of the things that you do in scouting is not only scouting players, you got to scout the coaches. So
Yeah.
if you're Chris Ballard, when you're putting all this together, you want to make sure that you have the right staff to do it. Now I'll say this, and I know this from a former Colts coach who knows Ballard well. Chris Ballard was always fascinated by Rod Marinelli from their time
Mhm.
together in Dallas. He loved the way that Marinelli, it was either Dallas or Chicago. It might have
Chicago.
been
It was
Chicago.
Chicago. Yeah.
Chicago. It might have been, he loved the way that they developed players on that side of the ball. So let's go back to who was on those teams in Chicago. Remember, they had Lance Briggs and Urlacher. I think Julius Peppers were there. And you remember the great defense that they played, all
Yeah.
traits, right? And
Yeah.
so his perfect world was, man, let me get the super athletes. Let me find coaches that are able to take these guys, put them in a scheme and develop them and how good we could be. And so I think for Ballard, some of that may have started working with and around Lovey Smith and Marinelli and those guys and seeing how successful it was for them, but wanting to take it to another level where you just have a team full of super athletes and you have a coaching staff full of great teachers that are able to take those guys, develop them, and max out their talent.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating case study, and we'll see how it all goes. Now they need the trigger man to develop, on a pretty good
In
clip
a
here.
hurry.
He's
In a
got to
hurry.
get going. He's got to get going
Yeah.
because that's going to make the rest of this whole thing go.
Have you seen any of the clips from this weekend? And I know it's just
No,
on air,
I have
but
not.
I will say this. Like, and I wasn't the biggest Anthony Richardson fan in terms of the first round, but that's in the past. Now he's there. But DJ,
Yeah,
when you see him, man, he throws it like a different dude now.
yeah,
It's different. They talk
yeah.
about him. The other thing that I will say, his his early appearances in press conference, he said all the right stuff. And I know
Mhm.
when you talk to people that talked about the meetings, that uh, look, he was very impressive as from a football character standpoint. Him and Josh Downs throwing balls in the parking lot before their first practice says a lot. If he's the
Mhm.
kind of worker that is required, like a Jalen Hurts kind of worker, yeah, this could work out. But it's all on him and how much he's willing to put in. But I would say he's off to a good start when you see the clips and how he's throwing it and how the connection that he has with some of those guys. Who knows? It might work out for them.
Yeah, and we said that during the whole run up to the draft. The whole thing with him is we don't dispute the talent. Now it comes down to if you look at the guys with the talent and you start throwing in the Jalen Hurts, the Mahomes, the
Mhm.
Josh Allens, the guys who have then developed further along at the NFL level. It's because they had the combination of the work ethic and the intelligence. We've heard good things about Anthony Richardson from both those
Mhm.
areas of his game, but you don't know until you know. Like, you got to get him out there and see how that comes along, and the work ethic and the intelligence has a chance to shine. If he has those two things like those other guys do, I mean, watch out.
Then he is, yeah, watch out. And then it becomes all those things, Giannis and Jimmy Butler and Kawhi Leonard and how all those guys put it down the NBA level.